the band whose name was believed to provide frontman Justin Vernon with an out, but ended up symbolising the permanence of their music instead. It's Bon Iver. Welcome to 6 Notes of Separation. If you're new to the podcast, here's how it's going to work. Every episode, I dive into an artist exploring their lives, their music, and any scandals they might have got themselves tangled up in. But to keep things fun and to keep things fresh, I've put my own little spin on things. Each episode I do on an artist has to be linked to the previous and succeeding episode in some way. This could be through producers the two artists have in common. This could be a label they're both signed to. It could be through a relationship history or a lyrical reference. Truly anything goes as long as there's a link. So without further ado, I'm going to get stuck into the man who single-handedly changed the sound of indie folk music and inspired a countless number of producers and songwriters that came after him. Today, I'm going to be diving into the music of Bon Iver and so the life of Justin Vernon. This episode, just as a little disclaimer, if you will, this episode's probably going to look a little different to previous episodes I've done in the series. In terms of the focus of the pod, normally I like to get stuck into the headlines and the scandals and the gossip of the artist I'm exploring. But to be honest with you, with Justin Vernon / Bon Iver, there isn't many scandals to explore. And that's not the only reason I'm taking a more musical focus on this episode. It's also because that's the whole ethos of Bon Iver and of Justin Vernon. It's music before anything. It's music before person. Their main purpose of being a band is to produce music. They don't want the fame that comes with it. So I guess that kind of makes sense that they haven't got themselves in a lot of scandals. They're not publicly exposed in that way. But that being said, we are about to digest one of the only scandals Bon Iver got themselves wrapped up in, as we take the time now to reveal the link between this episode and last episode's Tyler the Creator. One of Tyler the Creator's greatest inspirations when he was younger was the legendary rap artist Eminem. But as a fan and as a music critic, Tyler the Creator spoke out over the years about how horrible and terrible some of Eminem's music was. As a fan, he was just disappointed. As someone in the industry creating music, he just seemed like a hater. So this obviously, understandably, began to get under the skin of Eminem, and it all kind of came to a head in Eminem's 2018 song Fall, featuring Bon Iver. Do we see where this is going now? Which addressed the kind of Tyler situation, if you will, with Eminem dissing Tyler by calling him a homophobic slur. Very disappointing, not the way we'd want, any feud to go. It resulted in Eminem getting cancelled and subsequently cast a very ominous shadow over Bon Iver's own name too. Bon Iver took to Twitter to say he wasn't a fan of the message it put out and asked them to change the track, but they wouldn't do it. Who this anonymous they and them isn't entirely clear, but reading between the lines, I think it's pretty obvious that it's Eminem's team or label. Eminem also responded to the situation later that year, saying he had gone too far. But in classic Tyler the Creator style, as I was saying in last episode, this man is truly unbothered by anything and everything. He genuinely just, I think that's why people love him, he just doesn't care. But so in true Tyler the Creator style, despite being the victim of the hate speech, he was the one who was least bothered out of all of them about the entire situation, telling the public not to get offended for him. I mean, if that isn't really a summary of what Tyler the Creator is like, I don't know what is. But as I mentioned earlier, Bon Iver's name remains largely untarnished due to the fact the band's nucleus and frontman Justin Vernon keeps very much to himself. So on that note, let's rewind to a time that predates the conception of Bon Iver and starts with the quite literal conception of Justin Vernon instead. In 1981, Justin Vernon was born in Wisconsin, a place which he has kept as his home for the entirety of his life. It's somewhere which he continues to go back to and which kind of acts as his grounding point and his anchor. He formed his first band in 1997 at the age of 16, making friends with fellow attendees of the Wisconsin High School Jazz Competition to merge under the name Mount Vernon, his first band. From 1998 to around 2000, Mount Vernon had released 2 albums, but the band had to part ways as they figured out what the next steps of their respective lives would be. This resulted in Justin Vernon going to the University of Wisconsin to major in religion and minor in women's studies, as he wasn't quite ready yet to take music full time. But his love and passion for songwriting never left him, as he formed his next band in his second year of uni, called yearning. He also released music for his solo project under the name J.D. Vernon, putting out 3 albums from 2001 to 2006, but it was the band I just mentioned that he formed in his second year, yearning, that saw him take his first professional venture into music. The name was taken from the middle name of Justin Vernon's name, Justin yearning Vernon, quite a sick name, and consisted of 5 members: Justin, Joe Westerland, Phil and Brad Cook, and Chris Porterfield, with Brad Cook being one of Bon Iver's main producers to this day. They released their self-titled album in 2004 and their next album, Silent Signs, in 2005, and also moved to North Carolina for a short stint to expand their exposure, because they kind of rinsed Wisconsin, was quite successful in Wisconsin, so off they went to North Carolina to broaden their horizons. But this student band wasn't all full of hopes and camaraderie as yearning might have first expected. In 2006, the band broke up, claiming they wanted to go a different musical direction, all members starting their own new bands. But it was also a year that misery ended up being pivotal in Vernon's life. Not only did the band and Justin's long-term relationship with his girlfriend break up, but he also became very, very ill with mononucleosis, known more commonly as gland fever. This illness is a really, really nasty one. It takes a minimum of 1 to 2 months to recover from and causes your liver to become inflamed alongside your glands becoming really sore. But it acted as a blessing in disguise for Vernon, because it forced him to go back home to his dad's cabin in Wisconsin, which would lead him to the creation of Bon Iver. Bored and bedridden from his illness, Justin Vernon binge-watched the 1990s TV series Northern Exposure. The show is described as a comedy drama that follows the lives of characters living in a small town in Alaska, and it was one episode in particular that tracked the first snowfall of the season that grabbed Justin's attention. As all the citizens emerged from their homes to take in the snow, they went around saying Bon Iver to each other, French for good winter. But instead of spelling what would become his band name in the same way, Justin Vernon decided to drop the silent H from Iver in Bon Iver, due to the fact that the spelling looked too close to that of the word liver, obviously reminding him of his grueling illness. It's funny, I feel like people, when I first heard about Bon Iver, I was so interested in the name, because obviously I took French GCSE, so I knew it translated to roughly to good winter. But it was the fact that the H was missing. I was like, ooh. So basically, Hiver, if you don't know French, Iver is spelled Hiver. And Iver is spelled obviously without the H, as you'll see from the title of this episode. Anyway, and I was always like, there must be some cool creative decision behind that. But no, it was purely just because Hiver looked too similar to liver when it was written down, and that was just traumatizing for him. So kind of love that from him, that there was no real deep meaning behind it other than the fact he just didn't want to be reminded of his illness. But Bon Iver was so much more than a phrase from a TV show that stuck with Justin. In a similar way that Elizabeth Grant wrote her fate by choosing to be known as Lana Del Rey, Justin Vernon used the symbolism of Bon Iver to justify his own escape. He spoke about his admiration for the band name, saying it's like good death or good winter. Things need rest. The paradox between good and winter not only informs the sound of his music, which I'll circle back to later on in this episode, but it also allowed him space from the public eye to metaphorically die, as he took several breaks from making and releasing music. The fact that Bon Iver meant good winter to him, and it was this cycle of, a winter is only one season, it's temporary. That impermanence made him feel like he could take breaks from being in the public and from releasing music, and he could disappear for a while until it was time for the winter metaphorically to resurface, for Bon Iver to resurface. Anyway, if you're a little bit lost over the connection I made between Lana Del Rey and Bon Iver, it might become clearer to you if you listen to my episode on Lana, because I dive into it all there. But to kind of summarise quickly and paraphrase, both musicians used names to go by that sort of subconsciously predetermined the topics and aesthetics even of their music. For Lana, the name was inspired by the Hollywood actress Lana Turner, whose life was split between glamour and violence. And for Justin, it's this duality of light and dark and coming and going, which is all found in the simplicity of the name Bon Iver. But that's a rather large tangent I've been on. That's a rather large topic, which I'm gonna really kind of knuckle down towards the end of this episode. So for now, let me take you back to Bon Iver, to Justin Vernon, watching Northern Attitude and going by the name Bon Iver. Although Bon Iver is now a band, it started off just as Justin himself in this cabin in a really grueling winter whilst he was ill and bedridden. And he ended up making his breakthrough debut album, For Emma, Forever Ago, which Justin self-released in 2007. The album was written, as I said, during his time on bed rest and was really a distraction from his illness, as well as an emotional release as he processed the rough 2006 he had with the band breakup and the breakup from his long-term girlfriend. The loneliness and wintry setting of the album were qualities that I think people felt through his music. So I guess that makes sense why For Emma Forever Ago proceeded to land Bon Iver with breakthrough success. He originally recorded the songs as demos, set on re-recording them if and when a label would sign him. But the rawness and acoustic elements of the album is ultimately what landed him a glowing review from the music website Pitchfork, and ultimately what landed him a fan base. Several months later, after this Pitchfork review, the label Jaguar ended up scouting out Bon Iver and decided to sign him. Due to For Emma Forever Ago being re-released under Jaguar, the success of Bon Iver's debut album continued to grow. It became the 7th highest rated album of 2008 on Metacritic, a huge music review website. And it made it into the Rolling Stones' list of the 100 best albums of the 2000s. I mean, that's a huge accolade. Your debut album, and you've made it into the top 100 albums of the decade. I mean, that's a mad accolade. A song you guys will all know from the album through a bit like Who Was Bon Iver? What is this album? Never heard of For Emma Forever Ago. A song you will most definitely know is Skinny Love. I think Birdie covered this song, which is how it kind of got a lot bigger and a lot more famous. That's how I found this song originally. I thought it was a Birdie song. And then I was going back through Bon Iver's discography and found it on his debut album. I was like, oh my God, it's Justin Vernon's song. But it's funny, I remember listening to Skinny Love when I was like 8 years old. I had a crush on some boy in my class in year 4, and he did not like me back. And I ended up going home and I found the song on iTunes and I listened to it and I was like, oh, I just really resonate to this song right now. And it's just hilarious that as an 8-year-old, I was resonating to Skinny Love for whatever reason I do not know. But moving on, in 2010, Kanye West's keyboardist Jeff Busker introduced Bon Iver's music to West, who then reached out to the band to ask if he could sample their song Woods for his track Lost in the World. This led to many more collaborations between Bon Iver and Kanye, launching Bon Iver even further into mainstream media. His profile was boosted again when Good Music, Kanye's label, invited him out to perform with West at the 2011 South by Southwest Festival, which is a huge festival that kind of merges together film and media and art and music. It's massive. But in 2019, Bon Iver came out in an interview saying he can't really kick it with Kanye anymore on a personal level, but still holds a lot of respect and love for him. You know, again, done an episode on Kanye West. We all know where that went. We all know how disappointing the turn of Kanye West's life took. He was so great till he wasn't. But he did ultimately really help Bon Iver in building a profile and building a bigger fan base. In 2011, Bon Iver released their self-titled album, which won them Best New Artist and Best Alternative Music Album at the 2012 Grammys, being snatched off record and Song of the Year by Adele's Rolling in the Deep. To be put in the same category as Adele's Rolling in the Deep on your second album is pretty mad. Pretty mad. His album, Bon Iver, well, I need to stop saying his. I don't know if I should have clarified this sooner, but Bon Iver is a band. It started off as Justin Vernon, and then by 2011, with the self-titled album, he contracted other people to kind of get a bit more musical inspiration, to get other opinions, so it wasn't just him being in his own head about his music. It turned into a band. Anyway, but for Bon Iver's album, to be put in the same category as Adele's 21. It's quite remarkable. Anyway, the good death that Justin Vernon seemed to find bemusement and comfort from soon came into play for the first time as he announced the band's first break towards the end of 2012. He felt that the attention of the band was distracting from the music, wanting to take a step back to focus on the only thing that's ever mattered to him, the art. It's something we'll see crop up time and time again, but Justin Vernon really struggles with the exposure that comes with fame and making music. He leads a very, very private life, rarely showing his face and sharing pictures of himself online. Because his whole thing is that he doesn't want people to listen to his music because of him. He doesn't want Bon Iver to have a face or a frontman for people to fall in love with. He just wants the music to exist in its own capacity. It's true, like, he's been very successful in doing that, in keeping Bon Iver as this musical entity rather than these individual band members. It's quite fascinating, and I think that's also, it kind of lends itself into the way Bon Iver sounds too, like the production, which we're going to get onto in a couple of the other albums later on, is so, his voice is always covered in, like, is always processed and covered in different instrumentations. It's not even like you have a voice you can necessarily connect to and hear and be like Bon Iver. It's just a sound. He has a sound rather, like with Ariana Grande, I feel like she has a voice, but with Bon Iver, it's a sound. I can't explain it. But ultimately, I think that's perhaps what makes the fan base of Bon Iver so special. Although not accumulating the level of fame and success that we see from other chart-topping artists such as Noah Kahan or such as the 1975, Justin has successfully achieved what he wanted to do. He's got a strong and devoted fan base that have little to no hints of parasocial relationships to Bon Iver as a band. I think everyone that's a Bon Iver fan is clueless to the fact that Bon Iver is a band and not just one man. And I think we all have different memories of what Justin looks like, because at the end of the day, none of that matters. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing like for the whole fan base, but for me personally, as a fan of Bon Iver, it doesn't matter what he looks like. It doesn't matter that I have no idea who the other band members are other than Justin Vernon. I feel like we're all here for the music. That's really what matters with Bon Iver, and he's made it become like that. But it's so interesting looking at other artists like Taylor Swift or Gracie Abrams or Lizzie McAlpine, where people don't really, I mean, they do care about the music, but I think sometimes they care more about just seeing the artist than they do about the songs. And that's where I think Bon Iver again has been really, really clever in not making it about him, not necessarily even promoting one singular song. Like with Skinny Love, that song blew up, but that wasn't, people don't even know that that's a Bon Iver song. Like people know that as like a Birdie song, I'd say. Or people just know that song and wouldn't know the artist behind it. I think he's been really successful in distancing Bon Iver from the music, or like distancing Justin Vernon from the music. Anyway, I think that's just another layer of understanding who Bon Iver is, but Bon Iver doesn't release new music until 2016 with his third experimental and stylistically shifting album, 22 a Million. It debuted at number 2 on the album charts and landed a firm spot in Pitchfork's and Rolling Stones' best albums of the year. And I have to say, it's landed a secure place on as one of my favourite albums of all time. The production and instrumentation on this album is just genuinely like nothing I've ever heard before. Maybe that's a big statement. Maybe I don't know. I don't have a vast enough knowledge of music to even say that. But truly, I just don't think there's anyone like Bon Iver. And I always think it must be so depressing to be a producer and to hear Bon Iver's music, because he just creates something so special that I don't see any other artist do, and no other artist can do, because that's Bon Iver's sound now. If anyone to try and recreate that, it's like, oh, they're trying to be Bon Iver. You know, you see hints of it in Holly Humstone's music, and Bon Iver's one of her biggest inspirations, but there are a couple songs where there are glimpses of that Bon Iver effect. It's this vocal processing and these split harmonies. If you listen to the song 45 by Bon Iver off 22 a Million, that's my personal favourite. It's actually how I found Bon Iver. That was the first ever song of his I found. But that sound is you have glimpses of it in Holly Armstrong's music. If you don't know who she is, she's just a UK pop girly, done really, really well for herself. And I'd honestly say that the next closest thing to Bon Iver is Fred Again. And that's quite a bold statement. And obviously Fred Again, people are going to hear that and be like, what? Because Bon Iver's indie folk and Fred Again is jungle and kind of house, if like with house elements, I'd say. But honestly, there are songs from Fred Again where I'm like very Bon Iver-esque. For example, from his latest album 10 Days, this is Fred Again, he has a song called Where Will I Be? A stunning song. Genuinely, I wrote many poems to that song, but it's that it's that electronic sound, that processing and harmonies and vocals, like it was just very reminiscent of Bon Iver to me, but still very Fred Again. And I think that's why I love Fred so much, because he's just so fresh and he's so different. Like obviously he has his jungle music and his kind of like rave music, which you see on USB, but with 10 Days I feel like there was a bit more variation. And I think he had an album called A Secret Life too with Brian Eno, which also lends itself into that kind of Bon Iver bracket of being a bit more quiet, being a bit more introspective, and just being a bit more raw and emotional. Anywho, Bon Iver released his next album, I, in 2019 and collaborated with Taylor Swift on her albums Folklore and Evermore in 2020, delivering two unbelievably stunning songs that by no surprise ended up being fan favourites. The two songs, Exile and Evermore, are just gorgeous. Like, as I said, just stunning. Everything about them, that I think they're each like 5 to 6 minute, maybe 5 minute like belters. Unreal songs. And again, launched Bon Iver so much further into mainstream media, into the public eye. I think people who wouldn't have heard Bon Iver's name before were suddenly like, oh my God, who's this guy on Taylor's album? Who's this guy that's creating the best songs of Taylor's albums? In October last year, we got the first breath of new music again from him with his EP Sable, which saw Bon Iver decline the sentiment that he was returning to the acoustic style first seen in his debut Forever Ago. But instead, the stripped-back style was more so a sign of continued evolution from him that corresponded with where he was at mentally. Once again, with the Sable EP, Bon Iver had taken his break. He had taken his good death. We had not heard new music from him since 2019, other than on Taylor Swift's album. And he did a collaboration with Zach Bryan in between that as well. But he came back with Sable, and it was just a harrowing, grueling EP. Let me explain a little bit about it. There's an interview Bon Iver did last year for The New Yorker, which I've actually linked in the show notes for you all to read, because it's an unbelievable interview. Maybe it's also because I was listening to Bon Iver's music in the background as I was reading it, but it was quite moving and quite tear-jerking. The interviewer, Amanda Petrosic, sorry if I've butchered that name, asked such profound questions. It just wasn't even like an interview, it was genuinely like a therapy session. And Justin replied in such an introspective way. I just was blown away by it. I really encourage you all to read it. As I said, it's linked in the show notes for you. But he spoke a lot about Sable, the EP, saying it was a triptych, so something that split into 3 parts. The first song being about, so he has a little like 12-second song, which is kind of just sets the tone. And then the first song is all about accepting anxiety, the second accepting guilt, and then the third accepting hope. And it's really incredible how quickly you pick up on that as a listener, just from the way the music is composed. When I first listened to the EP Speyside, which is the song about accepting guilt, was the single out of the EP, and again, stunning, acoustic, stripped back, harrowing lyrics, like really, really good. But it was award seasons, the third and last song on the EP, which really grabbed me when I first listened to it, because there are these trumpets or saxophones that just resembles that feeling of hope, and it again like moved me, not completely to tears, but it nearly did make me cry. I was just astounded by it. And it's really interesting because Bon Iver said that the main, or like Justin Vernon said, the main inspiration for Sable was, it was just him, and especially Award Season in particular, that song about accepting hope. It was him sitting on this word almost. It was him believing in almost getting there and almost being okay. It's that feeling of it could happen, just the possibility. But he also talks about Sable being born from a personal necessity. That, as I mentioned, it's not a return to anything, but a raw second skin instead. He was in a place where he felt like he needed to not hide with swaths of choirs, but get as close to the human ear as possible. And what's felt even more vulnerable and exposing from him is that in the music videos for the corresponding EP, Justin Vernon decides to reveal his face. And he's done this before, like, it's not like Sia where he's genuinely, like, no one knows what he looks like. He has shown his face, obviously, when he's on stage and in pictures before, but he doesn't do music videos in the same way as Sabrina Carpenter would, you know, or like even Noah Kahan would. But he finally puts a person and puts himself in the same space as his music. He finally lets people connect to him in tandem with his songwriting, which is perhaps a level of exposure he's always been too scared to do before. So yeah, I think to say Sable is an expansion of Bon Iver rather than a return is very, very accurate, and again, very, very profound. It sort of proves Vernon's point of things needing rest, of things needing a good death to regenerate into something better, because by taking time away after releasing II and evaluating where he was at mentally, he ended up writing the most raw and beautiful collection of songs, I would say, in his discography. It really does hone into that idea of a good death, of something good being born out of an era dying. Later in this New Yorker article, Bon Iver sheds light on how broken he was on his last tour, quote unquote, suffering under the weight of everything. He recalls a moment from a show in August of 2023 where he was singing 715 Creeks. This song is a very, very grueling and harrowing song. It's just him, no accompaniment, nothing from his bandmates. It's just him, a microphone, and some effect that kind of splits, as I said, splits his voice into these different harmonies, and processes his voice in kind of an electronic sounding way. As he was singing, he remembers looking out at the crowd and preparing to say goodbye to the past 16 years of Bon Iver, the pressure and anxiety of it all becoming too much for him. It's such a heartbreaking story, this, but he has these thoughts as he's singing Creeks when he just starts to break down. There's a crowd of 6,000 or 7,000 people staring up at him, and he's just sobbing. His bandmates, it's so sad, but his bandmates are unable to help him because, number one, it's such a short song that they wouldn't have time to kind of go and comfort him and then go back to where they needed to be. But also, number two, it's an a cappella song. It's Bon Iver on the mic. There's nothing the bandmates could do. You know, it's not like they could just do a kind of instrumental section and people wouldn't necessarily be waiting for Bon Iver to continue. It was literally like Bon Iver was taking a break, crying, and people are all there expecting him to carry on. In the article, he goes on to explain where his thoughts were at the moment. I feel unsafe, like this is not an okay place for someone to be, and the crowd is going wild, you know. I'm not mad at them, I would also be cheering for encouragement, but I was thinking they want this. And I think that is such an interesting take. I've never thought about that before. When musicians have cried on stage before and you hear the crowd cheering for them, it's obviously upsetting seeing that a musician's upset, but more times than not, I'm also thinking like, oh, come on, like, I'm just like rooting for the crowd to kind of cheer them up. But it's so fascinating that from a musician's point of view, when you're in a really unhealthy space mentally, when everyone was cheering him on when he was crying, all he was thinking about was, oh my God, they want this. They want me to be this sad. And not only, I mean, of course, that really just gives an insight into the unstable place Bon Iver or Justin Vernon was in. But I also think there's probably an element of truth in that for anyone. Like, imagine having to stand and sing in front of 6,000 to 7,000 people. You're crying, you're sobbing, and they're all cheering for you. It must feel a bit like you're in a glass bowl. It must feel a bit like a deer in headlights. It's gonna, really, really destabilizing. And also, I think that's another thing that's really interesting about Bon Iver's work is ultimately people feel good from his sadness. You know, it's integral to his work. People ultimately love his pain because his music is an expression of that pain. People feed off of his brokenness because it makes them feel better, because that's the power of music. It's cathartic. it's comforting to relate to someone that feels the same way. But for him, as the artist putting that music out, he's not necessarily getting the same level of catharsis and comfort that fans would be getting. So I guess in that way, he fulfills his name, Bon Iver. He predetermines the impact of his music because people find goodness from the death of his humanity. Like, people find greatness from his sadness. But just as Bon Iver deals with that troubling duality of good death, they also deal with that of coming and going, of the winter being temporary while simultaneously forever being permanent. With their newly announced upcoming album, Sable Fable, on the way, it's clear that its meaning is the quintessence of what Bon Iver is all about. Describing Sable as a work of solitude and Fable as an outstretched hand, that idea of the light and the dark and the coming and the going and the pleasure from the pain is all too present. Bon Iver can never be one thing, and as much as he tries and as much as he sometimes hopes, Justin Vernon can never permanently disappear, because just like a winter, he will always exist in some capacity, whether it be for the length of time he remains alive or through the timeless impact his music has had on upcoming songwriters. The escapism the artist thought the name could provide him with was truly just a hoax. It was all for nothing, because whilst Justin Vernon might resemble the ephemerality of the winter, Bon Iver's music acts very much as the permanence of the seasons. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this episode here. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm sorry, I'm still taken aback by that. I just loved writing that outro, I'm not gonna lie. It's so poetic. It's just so poetic that Justin's the winter and his music's the season. He thought Bon Iver, as I said at the top of this episode with the intro, he thought Bon Iver would give him an out. He thought Good Winter would give him the impermanence he wanted, to take a break and to have an excuse to leave, because, winter comes and goes. But ultimately, winter will forever come and go. That impermanence is rooted in permanence. And I suppose Vernon is rooted in his music. Bon Iver's music can never die out, because it's forever out in this world and it's forever going to impact generation after generation of songwriters. Oh, it's just so fascinating. But I need to wrap up this episode here. So thank you all, as I said, so much for listening. If you want to keep up to date with all things Six Notes or Separation, please make sure to follow us at Six Notes Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. And as always, I'll be back very, very shortly with another episode on another artist, where we'll be exploring the link between them and Bon Iver.